I live in Florida, and that is a subtropical climate. So what that means is there's a lot of vegetation and wildlife where I'm at compared to where I was from. So it's pretty cool. There's a park down by my house we go to pretty regularly because we exercise there in the mornings, and it's got a pond and a footpath around it, and there's an outside exercise area and basketball and tennis courts and all kinds of stuff. And every now and then you'll see the gator. It's a big gator sitting out sunbathing. Uh, so we were up there the other morning, and it's early and dark, and so the lake's like, or the pond's real calm. It's like glass. The lights are shining off of it. And there's a fountain in the center, but there's no fixture, so it's like just spurting water up. And I got to thinking about that gator, and I was like, what would it be like if you saw the gator eat one of the birds? So this pristine environment that we're looking at, all this calm, just interrupted by one swift shot of like brutality and chaos, and it's over right away. And then if someone were to come up later, they wouldn't even know that anything happened. And so like what happened there, how'd it go? It depends on whether you ask the gator or the bird. But the point is, when there's intense situations, we expect people to react out of instinct. And I watch my daughter freeze up a lot. And she's even got hurt over it a couple of times. So she gets like really anxious, and then she's got indecisive, and just half steps. And when I was teaching her how to drive, she almost killed us a couple of times. One particular time, we were in the country, so cross traffic doesn't stop, and she's coming up to the stop sign, and she's idling forward. It's just slow rolling forward. And there was a car coming, and I noticed she wasn't going to stop. I said, "You got to stop." She's like, I can't. And she's just like not thinking, you can see, and she rolled out into the intersection. And she ran the guy off the road. And Mel's in the back seat, and she was screaming, and now you could just see the adrenaline still hitting her, and Brittany's still like letting the van coast. And I made eye contact with this guy. He pulled back out. It was just a little bit, so he wasn't hurt. And he gave me the finger and was not impressed. And Brittany's still idling forward, and Mel is still sitting there with her hands over her face until I stopped the van myself. We don't let her drive right now. But she's working on that fear part of it. But people have emotions, and it affects what we do. There's usually some idea of either like you just deal with your emotions, or you wear your heart on your sleeve, but those aren't really helpful because we're not sure what those mean. I mean, I don't get how that helps us. Our basic emotions are things like happiness, fear, anger, and those give a range to a lot of complex stuff. But I feel if I've found that if you start with the basics, then it's really helpful to just get to the middle part. And it's important when you feel emotions to know that you're not in control anymore, because you don't think effectively, and your creative energy gets blocked, and then we act in a manner that's driven by emotion, whether we realize that or not. And our emotions trigger feelings, and then our feelings turn into actions, and then we end up with the result that was driven by those emotions. And that's not always in line with how we would act if we were not in that state. And we can't stop emotion. If you try, it generally just turns into a problem down the road. So it'll manifest later somehow. And recently, I got angry. I felt frustration. I was in a meeting, and I wasn't the only one in the meeting. My counterpart also got angry, and neither one of us noticed. And as a result, we both made mistakes. It doesn't really matter what stuff outside had led to this, or what the specific mistakes were that were made. But just from a high level, what happened was we both ended up explaining ourselves. So you have two people pushing against each other, and nobody's trying to budge. And generally, when that happens, someone has to realize it. And by the end of the meeting, it was really easy to see. We had a hard stop, so it was a forced exit, and it's probably a good thing, given how things were going. Because once you get those two people dug in against one another, then, I mean, for most intents and purposes, your conversation's over. But typically, we tend to just drive through with some kind of just ruinous diligence. We just keep going. And like I said, by the end of that meeting, I noticed what had happened. I dealt with it pretty quickly myself. And I had tried to communicate that to my counterpart in messages after, but it was pretty obvious that they hadn't had the same kind of closure that I did. And my suspicion is they didn't really have the same realization that I had. So what do I mean with deal with it? When I thought back on that conversation and I saw what happened, I thought I saw what I'd done wrong and how I contributed to that. But I did not get mad at myself over it. And I didn't get mad at my counterpart over it either. It's unfortunate that it happened, but it's not fair to get mad at yourself for your emotion. Because we can't control our emotions. And instead, I just try to think about, like, what is it that I'm feeling? I felt frustrated. I felt like I was being misunderstood. I felt pressured, and I definitely felt surprised. And this all made sense. So now what I wanted to do is question those emotions. So I'm able to stop experiencing them then and start figuring out, like, what triggered it. Like, what stimulus and what kind of thoughts led to those. And then I can start figuring out what stimulus and thoughts were about those complex emotions, that frustration. And I did not try to tell myself that I should not have felt that. In fact, I spent time validating the way I felt. And then that's how I tried to think about what was happening. But I didn't figure it out. And I don't think it's good to suppress those kind of things. And it's really easy once the moment's over to just let it go. Or you might beat yourself up over it. So, but either way, after you're done, then we forget about it. Or we just keep a hold of it and then continue on in accident. So we might follow up too much, or you might apologize profusely, or you may go try to take action to change something so that never happens again. Instead, I just put it on the docket for later, because I had other meetings that I needed to go to, and at least now I was in a place where I could function. And then later I came back to that same activity, and I was trying to think about, like, why am I feeling anger? So I knew it was the basic emotion, the anger that drove that. And I started getting frustrated again, just thinking about it. So when those feelings started returning, I tried to reach out to a few people and said, hey, can you chat? But nobody had time. I did get to message with somebody a little bit, and we talked about some of the things that we do, how we handle stress. And it was a good chat. It wasn't directly helpful though, because I was still in a funk. So I went right back to that situation, and I wrote down messages. I wrote messages explaining what I thought happened to my counterpart, but I didn't send them. I just wrote them in my notebook. And I did that a couple times. Whenever I started feeling that situation like come up again, I wrote it down. And then I read those notes after, but something still wasn't right because it was making me frustrated again. So I wrote in a journal again. And then I turned to social media, which isn't what you think. I started cruising through LinkedIn. And sometimes I do that. Or I just look through some images. I'll Google something and look through some images. So I look for anything that causes some kind of response from me. It's could just be like a heightened reaction or just something I think is odd, and then I'll keep it. I'll keep it for later, so that I can use it for something. So the particular thing that I found was a post from somebody who was joining Twitter, and it was on LinkedIn. And to read the thing that I found, it says, "Welcome to Twitter. We're excited for you to join the flock. If you can't wait to meet your fellow tweeps," that's what we call each other, "say hello on Twitter using hashtag #LoveWhereYouWork and hashtag #OneTeam. And don't forget to tag at Twitter Careers, the Twitter flock." So what stuck out about that to me was it was just very self-promoting. It wasn't about the employee at all. It's promote us when you can. Don't forget to socially advance us. This is an incredible experience for you, but don't forget about us. And I went through and wrote down all the things I could about that particular thing. So I thought of like how that person might feel. That did they notice it? What implication did it have? If they did or didn't notice that, does it still impact them? And then like how somebody might feel their first day at Twitter. Is it like really because it's Twitter? Or is it like, these are the things I have done? Like, how do you feel? And then, like, what's the office look like in that picture and the way Twitter is coming across? Is it one of the open spaces? Do they have private spaces for private people? Does everybody have offices? So I just went through all sorts of angles, everything I can think of. And then I read through the notes after, and I just tried to kind of feel each of those situations. And I was being creative again, which started motivating me. And so I decided to handwrite this stuff into my notebook. And the goal with this was I was going to put a coffee cup on my desk and I was going to shred up some paper and set this notebook up. And I wanted to role play some of these situations and have my daughter help. But by the time I finished drawing out that bird, I kind of already had what I needed from it. So now I was ready to move forward. But this time I know I'm dealing with this stressful situation. And I knew my counterpart was going to want to discuss it again. So my first plan was just to reassure him again and see if I could bring that closure. But that's not where you can stop, because that plan might not work. It's probably not going to work. But so what if it doesn't? And now I have to have that conversation. And I'm aware this time that I felt frustration from it. And I go through the scenario in my head. Okay, so my counterpart's not satisfied. Plan 2. I have to agree to the meeting. So now I have to start thinking about the different stuff that could cause emotion in this meeting. And then I start playing out those scenarios. And I wrote down a couple of journal entries about the things that I wanted to say. And then I thought about points that my counterpart might bring up. And how am I going to feel about those? And how am I going to respond? And I was able to think about this problem, what it was overall in detail from this. And then I used my scenario planning. I used that in there. And I went through a whole lot of possibilities. Some of them were kind of ridiculous. Some of them were bad. But it's just like whatever I could think of until I felt satisfied. And now I'm satisfied, so it's time to act. And in the meeting this time, I was aware of my frustrations. I knew where they were at, and I could actively keep myself from just being overcome. So I listened first, and then I asked questions. And when I had the floor, I articulated my point, and I tried to address all of my counterparts' concerns. And I used my body language to communicate where I thought it was effective. And I tried to control my tone. And I didn't do as well as I wanted to with these things, but I still felt like it was appropriate. And my counterpart noticed that, and they articulated, like, you're being animated, and I can hear it in your tone. And for me, that was good, because now I know the conversation's still even. So we're both in control at this point. And I was being acknowledged, even if I wasn't understood. Understanding isn't necessary right now, because that's what the conversation's for. So I started relaxing. My posture is easier, and my tone was better, because I was assured then that the conversation was a two-way conversation, and it was pretty successful. And I never had good answers. People ask me things like, "How do you deal with stress?" And I never really wrote down any kind of process, and even paid that much attention, really. So I've made a bunch of stuff habit over time. And there's other stuff that I always did that I wasn't aware of in a way that I could articulate. But I was paying attention. So I understand that it's okay to have emotions. So I don't get upset with myself. You don't get upset with yourself for having them. You just address how you react to them. And you can't get mad at other people for having emotions. You just want to be aware of those emotions, and you question why. And because you got to remember, you can't think when you're emotional. And doing that why, it gets you to step out of that situation, and then you can look at it. And then you try to see that situation from other points of view. And then another point of view. Because if you can't look at your own situation that way yet, then you got to do some kind of activity that gets your head like working that way. So you can do something creative or consume some kind of beauty, because both of those things, they have just a profound impact on you. And then you can start playing out scenarios. As it's really easy to be taken by surprise or just become emotional in a situation. So it's helpful if you've thought ahead and you think about all these possibilities, and then you can pull from the kind of preparations when you're in the moment, and it can help you find control. And then I journal, as it's helpful to materialize these things. And you could say them out loud, you could draw them, you could journal, but you should do something to just put them out into the material world, so they're concrete, and then you can look at them and you can reflect. And that's going to help you understand them. It's trying to communicate these into material. It does that. It gives you that understanding. And then you even out your energy. And that's the last step for a reason, because it's really easy, because you can go to the gym and you can blow off all your energy, and then you're at a maintainable level, but you never really dealt with the root cause of those emotions. And that can be effective, but it's not really ideal. And it does have the potential to become destructive. It's just really easy to look at somebody and think, oh, they never get mad. And in that situation, I was just as surprised as my counterpart was. It's not that these people don't get angry. It's just that it's the intelligence and the awareness in the way that you deal with that anger or that emotion. And even if it's not right away. And because you can feel one way and then act another. And that's not being fake. It's just realizing that you're not in control when you're experiencing these emotions. And, emotions, they're not rational. So you validate your own emotions, but you still act in a way that's in line with yourself. So in order to do that, you just have to be aware. And when I first penned this, that's when that talk stopped. But sometimes we deal with stress for a long period of time. And I was out walking because I woke up early one morning and I was stressed out. And I played with my dog a little bit because he's like super happy about food. And I just watched him and I gave him a little treat, the pig ear thing, and just watched him eat it. And then when I was on this walk, I took a picture. And it's something I knew that I enjoyed, and the flowers were blooming. And I didn't really care when I saw them, but I knew to take that picture, and I knew to think when I looked at it that I used to feel good seeing that. And it's important because the way these things work is if you don't practice like this, it can go away. So when you're under stress all the time, if you don't take stop to experience something good or see some kind of happiness, it can be harder to do that. And that's kind of what depression is. The way our brain works, neuroplasticity, it'll atrophy these neural connections if you don't use them. So it's important to just still keep an eye on this when you're under stress by itself. And hopefully this is a little inspiring. I just finished Emotional Intelligence 2.0, and I think it's a great book. And that is by Travis Bradberry and Gene Greaves. And I also took Emotional Intelligence Masterclass on Udemy by Noah Maraby, and read Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. I do a lot of studying on this. And those are all good resources, but you don't have to use those materials. I'll just urge you to look into this topic because it's very important, and it can really have an impact on not just your happiness, but overall your success. So I hope this talk's inspired you.